empowering strategies through community cultural wealth and intersectionality. Welcome to a workshop from the Office of Multicultural Affairs. Together we will journey to enhance our sense of belonging, our sense of identity, and look towards positive and confident ways of moving forward. Thank you for being here. I'm Dr. James Salceda, and I am the Director of the Office of Multicultural Affairs. We're here to support all our student cultural resource centers and the campus at large to have positive and empowering dialogues and opportunities to explore crucial issues of culture and identity.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joanna Lemus. I am the Student Development Fellow for the Office of Multicultural Affairs. And so together we'll be exploring intersectionality and community cultural wealth, like Dr. Salceda mentioned. But we'll go ahead and do a land acknowledgement first.
So yes, we always begin by honoring the Tongva and Achiman peoples, who are the traditional land caretakers of the Los Angeles Basin and the Southern Channel Islands. We are always grateful for the opportunity to work at the sacred site known as Pavugna. It means the gathering place, and all of the land of our campus and in this region may be referred to as Pavugna. We pay our respects to the ancestors, the elders, past and present, and the emerging leaders. We recognize their spiritual connection as the first stewards of the land, and we thank them for their strength, their perseverance, and their ongoing struggle to have equity and inclusion for us all.
Okay, so first we'll start with intersectionality. Intersectionality is a term that was coined by Kimberle Crenshaw, and this is a really important term that has expanded and grown and allowed us to think about more of our own identities, how that intersects, and her experience as a Black woman really influenced how she perceived the world and the lens that she used to understand it, right? So her experience was not only based off her race, but also her gender. So again, as a Black woman, it was different than how a Black man would experience the world and the different types of inequality they faced or stereotypes or racism. So the term intersectionality really describes overlapping or intersecting social identities and related to systems of oppression or discrimination. She uses the example of Black girls in education being suspended at a higher rate than other students, right? And this is just not a Black issue, but it's also connected and intersecting with gender, right? Being that they're girls as well. So this lens really just allows us to identify how different identities like gender, like race, social class, ethnicity, nationality, and so on affect the way we experience the world, right? And different forms of, again, oppression or privilege that we may have. This term has expanded in a way that we can reflect on our own identities and understand the identities of other people and how those lived experiences do, again, impact them.
Well, here we have quite a visual way of looking at some of these intersecting identities. And remember, these identities are free-flowing, depending on the context or what's going on in the world. Some of them may become more prominent. And during a day, any one of these might come to the forefront. So we always have to remember that they are not only free-flowing, but they're complex. Race, for example. Race, as we know, is as a social construction, as an idea, and yet it is used in everyday life based on pigmentation or perception of our ethnic or cultural background, depending on how we look or what people think race looks like. So we have to confront it, remembering that in many ways, a lot of us are composites of race. We may be multiracial in our families or in ourselves. So even the word race has many levels, but this is to know that sometimes that's what people will focus on. Culture itself is complex, depending on where we grew up, depending on where our families are from, and how much of, say, a national culture, if we're an immigrant population, how much of that culture is retained, how much has been shared as we grew up. So culture is itself fluid, and it's something we can always nourish and enhance. So if you feel you don't fully understand your own culture, the university is a perfect place through ethnic studies and other departments to explore that culture, make it stronger, so you know your own background. Age is an interesting one because as you grow older, it becomes more important to people outside you. I myself know this from experience. And while we feel the same in ourselves, others will start to react to us differently as we grow older. And they'll use labels like senior citizen or elder. And it depends on who's saying it and how they're saying it and on what they're trying to convey. But it's a factor that, as I say, you'll discover over time. Language, again, if you speak more than one, is a unique resource and a unique identity. You may think in Spanish and speak in English, or vice versa. You may have different cultural ways of responding to words and ideas, depending on your unique language acquisition and your experience. So these are some of them. Joanna will look into some of the others.
Right. And so there's other identities that we encompass. So there's education, sexuality, class, ability, and gender. And one thing I do want to know, while some may be fixed, like your race, others may not be. So it can be very fluid. Your identity can be in a process of still exploration. It can be something that you continue to build on, or it can change, just like your education, right? As you continue to obtain more degrees or certificates or advance in your educational journey, that is going to be something that could change over time, just like your sexuality, whether you're straight, gay, lesbian, identify with the LGBTQI plus community. These identities are also very important to us and connected to how we experience the world, like class, ability. Some of these identities are invisible or visible, right? If we're able-bodied, some disabilities are invisible, like learning disabilities. Our citizenship may be invisible, right? You don't know just looking at somebody if they're undocumented or not, right? But that's a big part of some people's identity and how they experience the world. And so the same goes with gender expression, gender identity. And as you can see, there's the person in the middle, and there's all these different things pointing towards it, right? The arrows, the orange arrows, and all these different factors that influence us. Some identities may be more important than the others, right? I experience the world primarily through my race and gender, right? Being Mexican and a female, and sometimes our age and other things like that can come in, but may not always be at the forefront. But depending on where you're at and how other people perceive you, some things may be more important than the others, right? But it's important to recognize these things and how they all affect us differently. But it's best to understand yourself first before you can understand the experiences of others.
That's right. And this particular opportunity here is about self-reflection. You could literally pause the image so that you can reflect on the questions on your own, but you'll see that this even expands further some of our identities, adding, for example, religious or spiritual affiliation. One's religion is often woven with one's cultural identity. and certainly one's individual sense of self. We also emphasize here some of the abilities that are different among us. And as Joanna said, sometimes, let's say, a learning disability is not visible, and yet it's part of your identity, and you struggle or have found ways to address it in positive ways. We have a wonderful opportunity with our ability to support students with different developmental aspects. Socioeconomic status, too, helps to expand the wheel of intersectional identities. So keep those in mind. I would invite you to look at the first question or statement, which are to ask yourself, what identities do I think about most often? That may sound like a simple question, but actually it's a fairly deep one. Oftentimes we don't reflect on what part of our identities are most important. If you're identified by race all the time because of pigmentation or other aspects, that might be thrust upon you, though you personally wouldn't think about it. Others seem to think about it for you, and therefore you have to react to it. But also it allows you to look at this wheel of intersectional aspects and to contemplate it. So again, we've used this particular slide as one that allows you to pause, think about it for yourself, look at all the questions. Joanna will pick up another of the observations right now.
Yeah, and as you're looking at this identity wheel, right, and reflecting on your own identities and how these intersect, how you experience privilege, how you experience oppression, all these different things, just know that all of these different categories, it's not limited to just this, right? Again, it's fluid. It's really dependent on your own lived experiences. There's other identities that you may embrace that are not on this wheel, but that can be added. So if you have like a pen or a pencil and you want to draw your own sections and categories that are important to you, you can do that as well. But I want to point out that number 4 is a question that's really important to me: identities that have the strongest effect on how you perceive yourself, right? And so this is important to reflect on as you think about yourself, right? And your own identities and what's most important to you and how you experience the world. Ask yourself which ones have the strongest effect, right? And what does that mean for you? Why do you think that has the strongest effect on you? And this is just really great, again, just to understand yourself and take a moment to understand how intersectionality can apply to you. So we'll go ahead and move on to community and cultural wealth. Community cultural wealth is a model that was highlighted by Tara Yosso. So she challenges the traditional view that, you know, the upper and middle class bring the most valuable capital, right? And they have the resources to advance and continue that social mobility. This takes a shift and looks at students of color and the types of capital they bring, right? And it's really taking a strength-based approach and not looking at students from a deficit lens, meaning where students are lacking or weak, areas of weakness, right? But instead acknowledging the strengths that students of color bring. And she points out 6 different types of capital, such as aspirational, linguistic, familial, social, navigational, and resistance. Now, all students don't have to encompass every single type of capital, right? These are just different strengths we all bring. And I might say, hey, you know, like I really identify with familial capital. That's an area I'm very strong in. It doesn't mean you have to be strong in every sense, like aspirational, linguistic, resistance, and so on. So as we introduce them, we'll take a look at aspirational capital.
Yeah, so remembering is a kind of overarching umbrella that cultural capital, which encompasses all those dimensions, are the assets, they're the skill sets, they're the talents, that come from our background, racial, ethnic, spiritual, our families. And cultural capital then is a root system, providing resources of positive self-identity and an empowered sense of our potential, and a kind of healing energy that moves us forward into new opportunities and to purposeful action. This one, aspirational, is that which we seek, our hopes, our dreams, what we aspire towards. And often those aspirational aspects might confront or collide with real and sometimes perceived barriers, obstacles that seem to make it hard to pursue that dream. But this is where we look to the various elements within ourselves to strengthen ourselves. Perhaps you're a first generation college student and you got here because your family and community and friends saw the potential in you and wanted you perhaps to be the first in the family to be able to pursue higher education. That's an aspiration that was not just shared in yourself, but often was supported and given resources and nourishment so that you could follow through with that hope and that dream. So aspirational capital is something that we grant ourselves, though we are supported by a system that also is there to make sure we minimize or eliminate barriers and obstacles to our aspirations.
The next form of capital or set of strengths that students of color can bring is linguistic capital. So this really takes a look at an example, you grew up with more than one language spoken at home. Now, this is a lived experience that is a really great strength to have because you bring in different communication skills, and that oftentimes is deeply connected to your cultural heritage or background. So in the past, this may have been seen as a negative, but really taking a step back and seeing it as a positive, right? You have a set of skills that maybe your peer may not have, right? And so really just again embracing that language that you have, whether that's Spanish, German, French, or anything like that, identifying that and using that as an advantage in any setting that you may have experienced or will experience.
One of the most enduring, of course, in terms of capital, is the family empowerment we get, whether it's your immediate family, your extended family, or friends who you consider family. Sometimes it's not biological family that supports us most. It might be friends or those that we have met. And the idea here is that all of these aspects are here to support you, to affirm that you have this ability to move forward and you have these talents within you. Someone who believes in us. So you look at how the hard work and efforts of, say, your parents made it possible for you to pursue higher education, to follow your goals, to be open to expand your horizon as an individual. And so it can be through all kinds of guidance. It doesn't mean that someone necessarily sat you down and said, I want you to go to college. It may be just their openness when you said, I'd like to go to college, and say, well, mijo, I'd love to support that. What do we need to do to make that happen? It can also be something as sweet and personal as getting that home cooked meal, where you feel a sense of support through cultural tradition, through cuisine, or being listened to, having someone who really wants to understand what you're going through, and you can help them understand what the university experience is like, especially if you're the first one. So in both cases, it's a kind of mutual moral support. And this is extremely positive and one of the root systems, familial capital, when we look at all the different aspects of our wealth.
Another form of capital is social capital. So this really looks at the network of people and community resources that provide resources, information, emotional support, and offer wisdom in terms of navigating through certain institutions and society, right? An example would be that you have a clear sense of what community means to you, right? And so having this sense of community and having this support is something that you can't get in the classroom, right? Maybe you can with some peers, but ultimately, this community cultural wealth model just really acknowledges that all of these different things are going to help you not only navigate but succeed and thrive because you have that support system. If you have a question about something, you know who to go to, right? How do I disagree with my boss, or how do I challenge a professor? How do I advocate for myself, right, in certain situations or settings where maybe you don't have that support, right? And this is where it becomes a strength, and you can capitalize on these support systems and these networks that you have, even if it means networking, professional networking, right? You have a friend who has a friend knows of an opportunity. These are different ways that you can tap into these strengths and really reflect on what that looks like for you. Who are your people? Who are your support systems? Who do you go to when you need that emotional support? And really recognize that and understand that that's a strength in itself. And again, this whole model really wants you to reflect and look at the different strengths that you have that are not necessarily provided through the classroom or mean that you have to be upper or middle class to have.
Another very important component is called navigational capital. And this is something that means that we, as we move through schools, we move in workplaces, as we move among family and friends, there may be at times a hostile environment we have to face, even within a university setting. And it challenges us because there is prejudice and stereotypes around us. And navigational capital is knowing that stereotypes, by definition, are misinformation, are made to mock us and not to hear us or see us as we really are. The capital of using all of these aspects is that you have a strong sense of yourself. You know the victories of your cultural group. You know the strength of your family. And it allows you to navigate past these, whether they are overt hostile statements, or sometimes they're more subtle. It's called microaggressions or implicit bias that people might have, where they're not even aware that for you, it sounds biased and not supportive of who you are or your culture. And so you have to learn to develop these skill sets so that you recognize that they are the ones that are misinformed, and that these stereotypes need not pull us down because it isn't the truth. And the truth is to stick to the skills and the cultural wealth you have, to exercise your ability to critically think, to respectfully respond and challenge others when they bring that misinformation or those stereotypes to you.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a skill to navigate those types of situations. And it connects closely with resistance capital. So, resistance capital refers to the knowledge and skills taught by parents or community members, whether this is formal or informal. It ultimately challenges inequality and the status quo. So, an example would be, you know how to disagree with an authority figure and have your point be heard, right? So this can look like a lot of different things. This could be advocating for yourself, right? Or advocating for other people as well. So in terms of advocating for yourself, saying, hey, that's not right, I disagree with this, but knowing how to do so in a way that you can be heard and it's not going to turn into a large argument of some sort or become hostile. or almost work backwards, right, to what you're trying to achieve. Or if you're in a situation where you see one of your peers, maybe you have some form of privilege and you do have the opportunity to speak up and say, hey, that's not right, or I noticed you said X, Y, and Z, challenging these inequalities, whether, or things that are unfair. So being able to recognize that and voice that is definitely an important skill to have and strengthen if it's something you still want to work on. But this is a form of capital, and just understanding, like Dr. Salceda mentioned, right? We're going to be in dicey situations, sticky situations, and sort of maneuvering through those, relying on these things that we've learned through our upbringing and our lived experience, and being strategic in a way where we can challenge inequality, stereotypes, advocate for ourselves is not always easy, but we have these tools in our back pocket. And that's where this set of strengths really do come in.
Also, I want to add to that particular idea a kind of cross-cultural opportunity and even responsibility. And that is when we see people of other backgrounds, other gender identities, that are also being targeted and are facing some of the same oppression we are. To recognize that this resistance capital is a shared struggle, that we want to become allies for others and stand side by side as they resist. We want to form cross-cultural coalitions. We want to show a sense of humbleness, admitting that there's a lot we need to learn about other cultures, which ultimately strengthens our own, to see and learn from other cultures. And so everything Joanna said is absolutely true about one's personal sense of resistance capital. But I think we need to extend that beyond ourselves. And again, it requires what we call cultural humility, to admit that we're not the only ones facing a lot of these issues. And as we've seen across the nation and internationally, coalitions are being formed to say Black Lives Matter matters to us, and or indigenous rights matter to us, so that the resistance capital becomes even broader when we make sure that we are standing up for our brothers and sisters across cultural lines and bringing a diverse sense of support, coalition, and alliances. So we'll expand that resistance capital, and then it's all the more strong for ourselves and for others.
And so, why is this important, right? We went in depth with intersectionality, community cultural wealth, and again, just to recap, intersectionality really looks at the intersecting identities of people from diverse backgrounds. This can be applied to yourself and others, and understand how you experience the world, but also community cultural wealth understands the strengths that students of color bring. And if maybe you're not a student of color, you can identify these strengths in other people, understand that lived experience is very important and valuable, and just really being more empathetic. But we'll dive more into the benefits of these two theories and how you can connect them to your daily lives and your leadership and professional development as you navigate this journey. So
Absolutely. So we are going to be looking at the benefits of intersectionality, and Joanna will start off, and then I'll chime in a moment.
yeah, and so the first benefit to understanding both of these theories is to better understand inequality, right? We know that's not something that's just going to go away overnight, but just the term intersectionality itself draws attention to the systematic and structural oppression that happens and how that's embedded into everyday life. When you better understand inequality, you can actively seek to provide equitable practices and opportunities to those you lead. So it's just overall really important to understand that inequalities exist, there's privileges, and there's aspects of oppression that people may face. And once you're able to better understand that, you can be better informed to how you lead any sort of teams, or even working with people of diverse backgrounds.
And a kind of follow through of what I was talking about, coalitions and going beyond our culture, is one of the great benefits for ourselves and others is to become more empathetic and respectful to diverse groups. And sometimes this is challenging because other cultures have very different ways of looking at things. And while we want people to respect our beliefs, sometimes we have to self-reflect and ask ourselves, am I being just as open with other people's ideas, backgrounds, and lived experience? This is a deep level, also requires what we called cultural humility, to admit there are many things I don't understand. And to be respectful is to listen carefully, to understand somebody else's lived experience, and to know the many factors and the various roles that identities play, both to our personal lives and to the lives of others. So I would say, especially in a very volatile situation that we're in America with very polarized views, to be empathetic and respectful is a big challenge. It takes discipline, openness, but we are able to do that if you look at all those intersectional points of wealth that you have. You can stand tall and confident even in the face of different points of view. Empathy means being able to feel somebody else's feelings. And if someone says, what you just said to me hurts me, rather than argue the point and say, well, I don't think that should have hurt you, or I was just joking. Humility would mean we go right to their feeling and say, I'm sorry you were hurt. And then you could say, I didn't intend it, and please help me understand that so I don't do that again. So empathy takes restraint, it takes openness, and it's not easy, but it's something we can develop, and we need to. Even in the face of oppositional forces and ideas, we can be respectful as we engage those ideas.
And last but not least, the benefits of intersectionality and community cultural wealth provide you the opportunity to recognize strength and resiliency among others and among yourself. Like we discussed, there's a wide range of different identities people embrace and embody, and different strengths that people carry through lived experience and their cultural backgrounds. So it's really just honing in on the fact that lived experience is something very valuable, right? It's not something that we want to dismiss or ignore, but really draw attention to and understand how this can help you build relationships, connect with others, and still confidence, build confidence, right? And maximize potential in leadership roles. So as I'm working with others, or looking at myself, what type of leader I want to be, this ability to recognize strengths and resiliency, and people's lived experiences in conjunction with their education, right? Some things you can't learn in the classroom, and some the different perspectives you can bring or tap into makes all the more difference, right? In understanding how you're going to achieve the goals you want to achieve. And so just take an opportunity to reflect and use this to empower yourself and how you want to embark on your journey and navigate different spaces you might find yourself in.
Well, we want to thank you for your kind attention. We want to remind you that these empowering strategies are based on community wealth and these intersectional identities. And also to note that we would love to hear from you on ideas you have in response to this workshop, or perhaps themes you'd like further explored. The Office of Multicultural Affairs has a number of workshops that take some of these very elements and build an entire opportunity around them. These ideas are so rich that you can come and find deeper ways of exploring them. So feel free to let us know your ideas, your thoughts, and what you would like to see coming from us in the future. So again, from me, I want to thank you for attending this, and we look forward to another opportunity in the future.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. Please reach out if you have any questions and let us know, like Dr. Salceda mentioned, if you have any suggestions, thoughts, comments, or concerns.